Perhaps everyone thinks that the battlefield is the harshest place of all, where death lurks every single second, where a soldier must watch his comrades fall right before his eyes and wonder if he will survive long enough to return home. But the truth is far more cruel. The greatest pain for a soldier is not when he faces the enemy, but when he returns home, the very place that was supposed to be peaceful, only to realize that the ones he loves the most are the very people who bring him the deepest agony. The soldier in this story spent countless days in the army, carrying both responsibility and wounds that would never heal. He once swore to his brothers in arms that if he survived, he would return, keep his promise to his family, and rebuild his life. Yet the moment he set foot back in his hometown, the cold silence of the village signaled that something was wrong. People looked at him with unfamiliar, indifferent eyes, no longer with respect or pride. He dragged his weary steps along the dusty road, his trembling hand reaching for the familiar gate of his home. His heart pounded, his mind echoing only with the hope of seeing the smiles, the embraces, and the tears of joy from those who had been waiting. But when the door opened, everything collapsed. The wife he had longed for each day did not run to embrace him, did not cry tears of happiness. Instead, she stood still, her eyes cold and distant, and beside her was another man. In that instant, Michael's entire world shattered. This soldier who once stood firm amid storms of gunfire, who once stared death in the face without flinching, now felt his knees buckle. He struggled to breathe, his hands clenched so tightly that they bled. Yet the pain in his heart could not be contained. On the battlefield, he had been a hero. But inside his own home, he was nothing more than an outsider. His name was Michael, 32 years old, a soldier who had given his entire youth to the army. For 8 long years, he wore the green uniform, enduring brutal campaigns on the border where death was never more than a single breath away. The scars that ran across his body were not just ordinary marks, but proof of sacrifice, courage, and the countless days he spent walking the thin line between life and death. To his comrades, Michael was their anchor, the one who would always charge forward first when danger struck. Time after time, he risked his life to shield them, to drag them out of heavy gunfire, while he himself collapsed, bleeding and broken. And yet, strangely, he survived. He came back, carrying both pride and wounds that would never stop aching. But the day he left the army was also the day his life took a darker turn than any battle he had ever fought. He returned to his small village with hopes of living a simple life, of being reunited with his family and his wife and child. Yet cruel reality struck immediately. His parents, who had once been so proud of their son wearing the uniform, now looked at him differently. In their eyes, Michael was no longer a hero, but an unemployed man, a burden, in the poor village where everyone scraped by with small trades and day labor. They looked at Michael, a former soldier with no skills for civilian life, and shook their heads with pity and disappointment. But the deepest pain did not come from the neighbors, nor from society, but from the woman he loved most, his wife, who had once promised to wait for his return, who had wept as she saw him off on the day of his deployment, had changed. The coldness in her eyes, the distance in every word she spoke, pierced Michael's heart. He understood that years of separation had taken much away, but he had never imagined this day would come, the day he returned home, only to find himself a stranger in his own house. She accused him of missing the most important years, of not being there when the family needed him most. And then, little by little, the cruel truth revealed itself. While he had been at the border, battling death to protect his homeland, she had found someone else. Michael stayed silent, not because he was weak, but because the pride of a soldier would not allow him to argue, nor to beg. Quietly, he gathered his keepsakes, his medals, his handwritten letters, and walked out of the house that was no longer his home. To everyone else, he was nothing but a failure. No money, no career, no complete family. But deep inside, he still carried one belief: no matter if the world turned its back on him, the sacrifice and honor of a soldier would never fade. The day Michael walked out of the house that no longer carried the warmth of family, heavy rain began to pour from the sky. He moved quietly, his shoes soaked through, an old faded backpack slung across his shoulders. He had no idea where he would go, what he would do, or what the future held. For a former soldier with no trade in his hands, life in the village, already harsh, now seemed even more hopeless. While many others found stable jobs and built peaceful families after leaving the army, Michael had nothing but loneliness. Yet, during those seemingly darkest days, an unexpected twist opened the door to a new journey. One afternoon, while sitting in a small roadside cafe to escape the rain, Michael received a message from a lawyer. The message informed him that he had just inherited an old house from his grandfather, who had passed away several years earlier. His grandfather had also been a soldier, a man who fought in important campaigns during his youth. Before he died, he left behind a house on the edge of the village, a place long abandoned, covered in moss, forgotten by everyone. To most people, it was nothing more than a pile of rotting bricks and timber, a useless ruin. But to Michael, this news felt like a faint beam of light piercing through thick darkness. The day he went to claim the house, villagers sneered. "So that's it? We thought it was something valuable. But it is just an old shack about to collapse. Better off selling it for scrap." Their mockery cut into him like salt on an open wound. Yet he did not react. He quietly unlocked the rusty padlock, stepped through the creaking iron gate, and looked inside. The house was pitch dark, filled with the smell of damp and dust. But in that moment, Michael felt a strange sense of belonging. This was not just an abandoned house, it was his grandfather's last legacy. A place that held fragments of memory and family history. In the days that followed, Michael set to work cleaning. Alone, he lifted every rotten plank, swept away thick layers of dust, and replaced broken roof tiles. People watched and shook their heads. "This guy is crazy. Fixing up a rat's nest like this? If he is any good, he should be out making money instead." But Michael paid no attention. He needed a place to begin again, and this old house was all he had left. Despite the contempt and ridicule, he clung on, working day by day, as though rebuilding the house was his way of rebuilding his shattered life. During the process of cleaning, Michael discovered many strange things. Old black and white photos of his grandfather in uniform, standing proud and stern, crumpled letters with trembling handwriting that told stories of brutal battles. Even an old wooden chest, locked tight, containing symbols, maps, and documents he had never seen before. They suggested that this was not just a forgotten house, but one that held secrets never revealed. Day by day, as morning light filtered through the dusty windows, Michael began to feel that his new journey had truly begun. This was no longer just the story of a discarded veteran. It was the beginning of uncovering a legacy that seemed worthless to others, but one that might change his life forever. In the days that followed, Michael spent nearly all his time in the old house. During the day, he repaired and cleaned. At night, he sat under the dim light of an oil lamp, carefully examining every forgotten item tucked away in the attic. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became, as though each layer of dust he brushed away was slowly revealing a story that had never been told. The first thing he found was a small notebook hidden in the wooden altar. The pages were yellowed, the ink smudged with age, but the handwriting was unmistakably his grandfather's. It was not an ordinary diary. It was more like a secret record. Inside, his grandfather described fierce battles, nighttime marches, and comrades who had fallen, whose names were never remembered. Each line felt like a knife cutting into Michael's heart. He realized that many heroes had been forgotten, and his grandfather had been a living witness to those truths. On another night, while tearing down rotting sections of the wall, Michael stumbled upon a hidden compartment. Inside was a wooden box, carefully sealed, with a wax stamp still intact. He pried it open and found a collection of old documents, maps, and military codes. Some of the markings were so unfamiliar that even he, a man who had served in the army, was stunned. These seemed to belong only to those who had taken part in top-secret missions. In a small tin box, he also found a bundle of letters that had never been sent. They were written to his grandmother, to his father, and to fellow soldiers. In those letters, his grandfather spoke of truths that had never been made public, silent sacrifices, historic decisions, and the pain of an entire generation. As Michael read, he felt both pride and bitterness. Why had these stories been buried? Why had the sacrifices of so many disappeared into silence? But the discovery that shook him most was an old photograph. Tucked between the documents, in the picture, his grandfather stood alongside a group of officers, holding a thick folder. On the back of the photograph, a single line was written: "The truth must remain hidden, until someone brave enough comes to continue it." That line haunted Michael for many sleepless nights. What was his grandfather trying so hard to protect? And why had it been kept secret for decades? At first, the discoveries seemed like scattered fragments. But slowly, they formed a mysterious picture. Michael began to understand that this old, decrepit house was not useless. As everyone believed, it held a piece of history, a truth hidden away by both time and men. And somehow, fate had chosen him, an abandoned veteran, a man despised by others, to uncover and safeguard that truth. Each night, sitting alone in the silent house, Michael heard the wind whistling through the cracks, the rustling leaves outside sounding like whispers. He felt as though his grandfather and the soldiers of old were still watching, waiting for him to continue the journey. And deep inside his heart, he knew this was no longer just his story. This was a legacy he was destined to protect. Since moving into the old house, Michael became more and more absorbed in his strange discoveries. He spent his days repairing and his nights reading the documents his grandfather had left behind. But as the pieces slowly began to form a larger story, trouble soon followed. Rumors spread through the village that Michael had found a hidden treasure in his grandfather's house. People gossiped. Some said he was lucky. Others mocked him. He is just fooling himself. It is probably nothing but a pile of useless papers. Who would care? But the truth was that there were already people watching him closely. Not because of the old house, but because of the classified documents now in his hands. The first to appear was his wife. After months of silence, she suddenly came back, claiming regret and begging for a second chance. With tears in her eyes, she said she had felt abandoned during his absence and had lost her way. Now, seeing him suffer in that ruined house, she wanted to make it up to him. But Michael's eyes were no longer the same. He looked at her in silence, his heart aching yet filled with suspicion. He knew she was not there only for love, and when he refused her, her gentle face quickly turned cold. Her words cut like knives. "Keep your broken house then. You will soon see that it will bring you nothing but trouble." And trouble did come. Strangers began lurking around the house. At night, Michael heard footsteps and whispers outside. One time, he even discovered the door had been forced open. Someone had searched inside, but luckily they had not found where he had hidden the documents. Michael realized then that what his grandfather had left was not simply letters or keepsakes. It might be tied to a military secret, perhaps even a long-buried conspiracy. And now, someone was determined to seize it, silencing him if necessary. One gloomy afternoon, Michael received an official summons from the local authorities. They demanded he surrender everything he had found in the house, under the pretext that the materials were related to national security. Michael froze. He knew that if these documents fell into the wrong hands, they would vanish forever. But if he refused, he would face isolation and even danger to his life. The tension grew worse when even the villagers, who had once despised him, now whispered behind his back, accusing him of hiding gold, silver, or some great secret. One night, a group of young men gathered in front of the house, shouting, throwing rocks, demanding that he reveal the truth. The image of the once proud soldier was now reduced to a laughingstock, judged and shunned in his very own hometown. Inside Michael, a storm raged. He thought of his fallen comrades, of his grandfather's trembling words in those journals, "As long as one person remembers, the truth survives." He understood this was no longer just his burden, it was his responsibility. If he gave up, everything would be lost, but if he resisted, he would face enemies far more powerful than he could imagine. The breaking point came on a stormy night when intruders finally attacked his home. Michael leapt up to face them in the darkness. Figures in black raincoats stormed inside, tearing the house apart. Michael fought back with all his strength. His body, trained in the army, gave him the edge, but he was alone. While they came in numbers, organized and relentless, amid the chaos, he heard a familiar voice, the voice of his ex-wife. Coldly, she gave the order. Find the documents. He must not keep them. At that moment, Michael's heart shattered completely. The woman he had once loved deeply, the one he had dreamed of building a future with, was now standing against him. A traitor. He had no tears left, only burning rage. With a roar, he hurled himself into the fight, determined to protect his grandfather's legacy at all costs. The clash raged through the storm, the sound of blows and shattering furniture mixing with thunder. At last, the intruders retreated in frustration, but Michael knew they would return. He sat among the wreckage, blood trickling from his forehead, but his eyes burned with determination. He understood. This was only the beginning of a new war, one no less brutal than the battlefield of years past. When the stormy night passed, Michael's house looked no different from a battlefield. Wooden walls were smashed, furniture lay in ruins, and torn documents were scattered in puddles of rainwater. He sat silently for hours, his eyes empty, his body covered with wounds. But as the first rays of dawn pierced through the cracks in the roof, Michael noticed something strange. A wooden plank in the corner wall had been kicked loose, revealing a hidden compartment beneath the floor. He limped over, brushed aside the debris, and pulled the plank away. Beneath it was a deep cavity reinforced with steel, covered in decades of dust. With all his strength, he pried open the lid, his heart pounding. Inside was not gold or treasure, as the villagers gossiped, but an old wooden chest, carefully locked. Michael remembered the small key he had once found inside his grandfather's tin box, never knowing what it was for. Now, he slid it into the lock. A sharp click echoed through the silence, slicing the tension in the air. Inside the chest were thick bundles of documents, wrapped in protective cloth, along with a handwritten letter from his grandfather. Michael's hands trembled as he unfolded it, the words on the page echoing as if in his grandfather's own voice. "Michael, if you are reading these words, it means you have found the truth I spent my life guarding. These documents are not just memories. They are proof of sacrifices that were never acknowledged. Soldiers, my comrades, died during a top-secret mission. They perished in silence, and history never recorded their names. I preserved all the evidence because I believed that one day, someone would have the courage to bring this truth into the light. Michael, you are my grandson, and you are also a soldier. I believe you are that person." Michael's hands shook violently. He opened the bundles and found an entire archive, battle maps, campaign reports, lists of soldiers who had died without recognition. Among them were his grandfather's closest comrades, men who had fallen in a hidden war to secure the peace of today. But what shocked him most was a set of files stamped, "Top Secret." Inside, the truth was laid bare. Some high-ranking officers of that era had exploited missions for personal gain and covered up their mistakes. They had sent young soldiers to their deaths, then erased all traces to preserve their reputations. These documents did more than vindicate his grandfather and his comrades. They had the power to shake the foundations of those once hailed as heroes. At that moment, Michael finally understood why he had been watched, why intruders had attacked, and why even his ex-wife had been drawn into this web. All of them were after the truth that now rested in his hands. And yet, in that same moment, for the first time in years, Michael felt the fire inside him ignite again. He was no longer the discarded man, no longer the useless veteran in the eyes of the world. He was the sole guardian of the key that could restore honor to countless soldiers who had died in silence. Michael clutched the files to his chest. No matter the danger ahead, he made his decision. He would protect this truth at all costs. Not for himself, but for his grandfather, for his comrades, and for the justice owed to the fallen. The morning sunlight streamed into the ruined house, illuminating his hardened face, his eyes blazing with resolve. A new chapter of war had begun, and this time, he was not alone. Behind him stood an entire generation who had sacrificed, waiting for the truth to be revealed. From the day he discovered the hidden chest, Michael seemed like a different man. His eyes no longer carried despair or darkness. Instead, they burned with a determination he had never known before. He understood that what he now held in his hands could change everything: his grandfather's honor, the truth of fallen comrades, and even his own fate. But to protect this truth, he would have to face grave dangers, powerful forces that had done everything to bury it in silence. Michael became more cautious. He copied the documents, divided them, and hid them in different places. In case his house was searched again, he secretly reached out to an old friend from the army, who now worked in a historical archive unit. When Michael showed him a small portion of the files, his friend froze in shock, then gripped Michael's shoulder tightly and said, "Do you realize what this is? This is the evidence we have been searching for all these years. If this comes to light, countless soldiers will finally have their honor restored." But bringing the truth into the open was no easy task. Those who had once broken into Michael's house did not give up. They followed his every move, spreading slander and lies, accusing him of fabricating documents for personal gain. The villagers, who had once looked down on him, now turned their backs even more harshly. They whispered, sneered, and some even said directly to his face, "You are nothing but a washed-up soldier. Stop pretending you are some kind of hero." Those words cut deeply, but Michael no longer wavered. He remembered the fiery eyes behind his grandfather's trembling handwriting. The words, "As long as one person remembers, the truth will not die." He knew now that he was the one chosen to carry that responsibility. The climax came when Michael decided to bring the entire set of documents to a local government meeting, where even those who had pressured him to surrender them were present. In the small room, he stood, placed the thick stacks of files on the table, and spoke with a steady, commanding voice. "I have nothing left to lose. But there is one thing you cannot bury, the truth. These are the records of soldiers who fell, yet were never remembered. These are the documents that expose the schemes and mistakes that were hidden away. If you want to deny it, then look at every number, every report, every name written here. They deserve to be remembered by history, not erased in silence." The room fell into heavy silence. Those who had once scorned him now looked at him differently. Some lowered their heads quietly, while others turned pale with fear. Finally, an elderly official, a former comrade of his grandfather, stood and said with a choked voice, "He is right. It is time we return the truth to the fallen." From that day on, everything began to change. The documents were handed over to higher authorities for verification. Journalists and historians came to Michael, eager to hear his story. The same village that once mocked him now buzzed with astonishment, realizing that the old house they had despised held within it a piece of the nation's memory. More importantly, the honor of his grandfather and the nameless soldiers was slowly restored. Their names appeared in reports, in memorial ceremonies. They were no longer forgotten shadows, but were finally acknowledged as true heroes. And Michael, once abandoned and ridiculed, now stood as the guardian of an entire generation's legacy. He did not seek fame or glory for himself. What he had preserved was justice for the fallen and a reaffirmation of the eternal values of honor, loyalty, and sacrifice. On the day of the unveiling of a new memorial built at the site of the old house, Michael stood silently beneath the national flag waving proudly in the wind. His eyes no longer carried the sadness of the day he first returned home. Instead, they shone with pride. He knew he had done the right thing, the very thing his grandfather had long hoped for. When the memorial ceremony ended, the old house had been transformed into a small exhibition space where people could come to see relics from a time of war. The moss-covered home that had once been ridiculed now carried a new meaning. It stood as a symbol of memory, of truth, and of those who had sacrificed in silence. Michael walked slowly through each room, his hand gently brushing against the black and white photos on the walls. Each face, each smile, each gaze in those pictures seemed to be looking at him, as if whispering words of gratitude. Outside, the sound of children's laughter filled the yard. The village kids ran around, looking up at the red flag fluttering in the wind. They asked each other, was Uncle Michael really a soldier? Was his grandfather a soldier too? Those innocent questions warmed Michael's heart. He understood then that sacrifice was not only about being remembered, but also about planting in the next generation a belief in courage and loyalty. But not all moments were joyful. In the crowd that day, Michael noticed his ex-wife standing at a distance, silently watching. Her face no longer carried the coldness or bitterness it once had, but a flicker of regret, a shadow of remorse too late to matter. Michael only bowed his head slightly before turning away. He knew some wounds could never heal, and some betrayals could never be undone. But now, He no longer carried resentment. Life had taught him that forgiveness was not about going back, but about setting oneself free. One afternoon, Michael stood before the newly built memorial stone, his hand resting on the carved words, dedicated to those who sacrificed in silence, so that the truth may live on. He closed his eyes, letting the wind rush past, carrying with it whispers of the past. In that moment, he saw his grandfather. He saw the comrades of long ago, all smiling at him, and he knew his journey was not just about clearing their names, but about proving that no matter how much the world forgets, the truth will never die. Michael turned and walked down the village road. The same eyes that once looked at him with disdain now watched with respect. Children called him Uncle Soldier, while the elders nodded at him with admiration. He was no longer the man who had returned empty-handed, but the one who dared to stand and protect honor. Above him, the sunset blazed red across the sky, like the blood of those who had fallen, but also like the eternal flame of belief. Michael spoke softly, his voice steady, as though to himself, as though to all the departed souls. A soldier may lose his family, his friends, even his life, but one thing no one can ever take away is honor. And as long as one person stands to protect it, the truth will live forever. In that moment, the scene faded into darkness, leaving only the sound of wind rustling the leaves and the image of the flag waving proudly against the sky. Michael's story does not end with the pain of a soldier returning from the battlefield. It is also a mirror of life itself. Sometimes the deepest wounds do not come from bullets or bombs, but from betrayal, from being forgotten, and from the indifference of those closest to us. He endured it all, being looked down on by his own family, being betrayed by the woman he once loved, being mocked and cast aside by the community. Yet, in the very depths of despair, Michael discovered the light, the truth his grandfather and his comrades had entrusted to him. A truth powerful enough to shatter prejudice and restore honor to those who had fallen in silence. And with his own hands, he defended that legacy, refusing to let it be buried, despite the schemes of those who wished it hidden. That journey transformed him from a man the world dismissed as a failure into a true hero, not because of new victories on the battlefield, but because he dared to stand up and protect what was right. But this story is not only Michael's. It is also a question for each of us. If you were in his place, what would you choose? Would you remain silent for the sake of fragile peace? Or would you rise to defend truth and honor, even if it cost you everything? Would you forgive betrayal and walk away? Or would you confront it to prove your faith? Put yourself in Michael's shoes. Imagine that moment. What would your choice be? This is not just a story to hear and then forget. It is a reminder for us all that honor, truth, and loyalty are never luxuries. They are the very things that keep a person standing firm against every storm. And now, I want to hear your answer. What will you choose?